Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm your host, Shami Lochanlal. We have an interesting program today. It's sort of a panel discussion on Speak Your Mind. And for way too long, we have described our fellow Fijians according to their race, their looks, their beliefs, and other things, and appearances also. And just lately, we celebrated International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination, where we were talking about equality and freedom for all Fijians. Now, if you look at Fiji, I think it is very timely to talk about this. So I've got guests on Speak Your Mind. We have got Ziad, who is a law student. Welcome on this Talkback show, Ziad.
Thank you for having me.
And I've got the CEO of CCF, Mr. Sarah Bulatani, and the Director of Human Rights, Ashwin Raj. So welcome on the show, gentlemen. Just before we start the Talkback show, I'd like you to give me a brief description in about 15 to 30 seconds, please, all of you.
I work as a radio presenter on Mirchi FM, and I also am a law student. Of course, I should mention that I'm not nearly as qualified as the other two gentlemen here. So in these discussions, I'll only be giving my point of view with regards to what I see every day as a youth.
Yes. Sarah?
Sam, like you said, Bultani from the Citizens Constitutional Forum.
Ashwin?
Bulavinaka, Fiji. My name is Ashwin. It's an absolute privilege to be on your show this afternoon.
Yeah. So let's start with the first question, where all gentlemen are going to get an opportunity to talk and speak their mind. My first question is, why have we, as a people, been so obsessed with racial profiling in everyday conversation for so long? Ashwin, shall we start with you?
That's a very, very important question, and it has to do with the weight of our history. We've had a history of colonial governance in Fiji, starting with the colonial era, and race has been an important marker of difference for the purposes of governance in terms of indirect rule in Fiji, where there was a policy of racial compartmentalization between the Ethokais, the Europeans who held the balance of power, and at that time Indians who came in as indentured laborers. Then if you look at the post-colonial era, you have the whole question of the significance of race in issues of governance again, in terms of who's going to have monopoly over the institutions of governance and power, the question of parity for Indo-Fijians, the issue of paramountcy for Ethokay community, and the question of privilege for Europeans. So that is a dynamic that has also shaped our post-independence political landscape. And if you look at more recently, the history of institutionalized racism from 1987 onwards. And so what we're dealing with really is the legacy of racism,
which has been carried forward
in other ways,
yes.
From one sort of era of governance to another.
Right. Thank you, Ashwin. We'll move to Bulutani.
To add on from Ashwin, racism is socially constructed, and I can say it is an issue which is very common in any multicultural country, multicultural society. However, it's not only people are obsessed with. It is very concerning, and people are also uncomfortable in talking about it. So I'm really thankful that we've been invited to this show, so we can continue the conversation that we started not only from last Saturday, from previous activities that we encourage people to start talking about racism. You will not only understand it and know about it, what is happening, if you don't talk about it. So, go back to your question.
Why we are so obsessed?
Because the lack of understanding and the lack of respect towards another ethnic group that is in our society.
Ziad, what would you like to comment?
Well, I agree with both gentlemen in saying that we do have somewhat racist legacies in Fiji, and even for a long time, race was somewhat institutionalized in most aspects of Fijian governance. And we can see that there's a shift away from that. But I think that it is really important to discuss how we can get rid of our racist legacy. And I think even among the youths, this is something that really concerns us as youth. The amount of racial profiling that we hear in everyday conversation.
Do you feel the brunt of it quite often being a youth, or do you think that it's only a separate level where it comes to paramounts and other things? You also face that?
I haven't exactly faced any instances of racial
Like as in
racial
youth,
profiling.
when you speak on behalf of youth, you do admit that you face that situation, right?
Yes,
Okay.
we
let's
do face.
let's move on to our next question. Does the media need to take some responsibility for pushing this responsibility? Until recently, everyday stories contained, we've been reading and listening to news, there's a lot of racial profiling. Even when a person's race was not important to the story, it was added instead of mentioning a name. Shall we start with you, Ashwin, again?
Yes. The media has played a fundamental role in producing a certain kind of regime of representation that, sort of gives credence to this whole notion that, as one of the leaders, Ratu Kamisesamara, in fact once said that race is a fact of life. Well, the question we need to ask today is, how is this facticity actually produced? We know that race is a social construct that exploits biological distinctions, looks at our habits in terms of what we eat, what we look like, how we smell, the certain choices we actually make. So in a fundamental sense, the regime of facticity is actually produced by the kind of stereotypes that are prevalent in the media.
Okay.
The discourses get normalized.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry,
through the
Ashwin,
media.
sorry to interrupt you. We've got one more minute, so we'll give
Sure.
30 seconds.
Yeah,
And then definitely when we come back after the break,
Absolutely.
we'll talk more. Bulutani.
The question is very straightforward. Yes, the media has a very important responsibility in amplifying these messages of unity to raise awareness that racism is here, it is happening, and this is what we can do. So for CCF as an NGO, part of the civil society, it is always our request and our aspiration and our target to use media as the medium to communicate with the public and with the mass.
Thank you. Ziad, your comments, please.
Well, as an employee of FBC and as a media organization, I've seen that we as an organization have done a lot to combat race. And just in fact, it's part of the question, like if it's not necessary to the conversation, you don't need to mention race at all.
Yes. Thank you. So, gentlemen, we'll take a break. And when we come back, we're going to ask a very important question, which is, have we progressed? Yes, we've raised awareness, but have we progressed from combating racism in Fiji? Stay with us. We'll join you soon after the break. Welcome back on Speak Your Mind. I have Director of Human Rights, Ashwin Raj, and the CEO of CCF, Bulutani, and Ziad, who's a law student. And we are talking about, our topic is obsessed with race. So earlier we talked about what can media do, what role can media play, and have we progressed in combating racism in Fiji, Ashwin?
Shami, both questions are very, very important. If you look at, the serious legal and political transformations that have taken place in Fiji to erase the ignominy of institutionalized racism from our public memory, you look at the constitutional reforms. For the first time, we can all call ourselves Fijians without reference to our ethnicity. We enjoy common and equal citizenry for the first time. For the first time, people can apply for scholarships, loans, have access to the education system, the health sector, access their constitutional rights, be able to vote without necessarily having to go through a racially segregated voting system. So yes, we've come a long way. We've got a very, very strong Bill of Rights that explicitly references race and ethnicity as markers of difference, though that are prohibited grounds of discrimination. But we've also got a long way to go. Long way to go. If you look at our media, the media exploits our differences, particularly at a time when the political fault lines run deep around the cusp of elections. So the kind of divisions and fissures in our society based on race and religion, And you know, this has a huge impact on our society. If you look at what happened in Rwanda with the genocide, I mean, look at the way the media was portraying Hutus and Tutsis. More recently, if you look at what is happening in Myanmar with the Rohingya people, the UN has recognized that, in fact, and through the BBC, that in fact the social media played a huge role in the ethnic cleansing there.
Bulutani, would you like to continue from there? So what Ashwin said, and taking into consideration social media too, and how have we progressed in combating racism?
The concern from the Citizen Constitutional Forum is the is the abuse of freedom of expression, the increasing hate speeches using in the social media, and that's why we continue to raise awareness that rights comes with responsibilities. With making progress since Fiji's ratification of the International Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination in 1973, looking at events that took place after 1973, 1990, after 87 we had the 1997 Constitution. We made some baby steps, and then 2030, like what alluded to by Ashwin, and removal of racial connotation names of schools. We have common citizenry, electoral removal of ethnic-related electoral laws. Now we have a common role, and yes, we have made baby steps. We have made some progress. There's a lot more improvement
To be done. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, Ziad, your generation, and of course everyone is using social media a lot. While we're talking about media playing its role and how have we progressed, do you feel that while other medias have progressed, social media has taken us back?
Yes, it certainly has. What's really shameful is that there's a lot of racist hate speech going around, and all of that is done under the guise of freedom of expression, which is completely wrong. International conventions as well as our constitution says that we do have the right of freedom of expression, but of course every right has its own limits. So that's why it gives me, as a youth, it gives me a lot of peace of mind knowing that as a nation, we're also starting to look at regulating social media.
So how has the impact of racism in Fiji affected us economically and socially?
Once again, if you look at the legacy of institutionalized racism, you have to begin not simply with the economic cost. You have to look at the psychological impact of, you know, legacies of institutionalized racism, racial profiling, hate speeches. When you have, and we've had that history of politicians actually calling, you know, people from a certain, you know, ethnic background obnoxious weed. That goes a long way in debasing and dehumanizing people. And when you do that, then it's so easy to just rob them of their dignity and rights.
You made a point there, and you just hit on the nail. Bulutani, what would you like to say?
We are the result of the colonial divide and rule, and it really affected us economically, socially, and politically. Due to racism, we had the issue in 1987, 2000, resulted in brain drain, sanctions, removal from regional and international bodies, denials of opportunities to people based on ethnicity, whether it's employment or on land equipment, land tenancy, and also it experiences that people went through resulted in them to become to take up that to be racist to another ethnic group.
So it has definitely affected us. We though we tried, Fiji tries to move ahead, but this racial profiling, ethnicity, etc., is pulling us back. I think the main root it's given a lot of root to hatred, which we are now being affected with. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about, as we move closer to elections, how is this racial profiling, the evil, what we say, is going to affect us, and what are we going to do about this soon after this break. This is Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, and with me I have got Zia, the law student, and Citizens Constitutional Forum CEO Bulutani, Ashwin Raj, who's the Director of Human Rights. You can visit our Facebook page, Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, and you can start posting comments as we speak. So earlier we were talking about the impact of racial ethnic profiling and its impact. Let's continue from there, Ashwin.
So, if you look at the ways in which politicians have actually exploited the legacy of institutionalized racism, I think you can't discount that. For instance, recently, one of the politicians tweeted, on Twitter, using a social media platform, that following the I think stones were thrown at a particular temple or religious gathering, and he asked whether, quote unquote, the people of my religion and therefore the people of my race by extension are under attack. And he said, somebody needs to answer. The fact of the matter is, and I want to say this to this particular politician without naming him, that no, it's not the people of your race and religion under attack. All religious communities are under attack because we live in an era of extremism.
So
where
what you're trying to
people
say
are not
is
exercising reason.
Yeah.
So you look at what appeared in Parliament. You look at the reports that are tabled in Parliament. I think it was the Minister of Defense or somebody. Temples, churches, mosques, all under attack. So this should not be about my religion and my race. It's all of us. This
so
is
there
shared
you go.
humanity.
It's again religious profiling here.
It's profiling precisely because desperate politicians are trying to exploit the differences.
Okay. Bulutani, now as we come closer to elections, we have the new and evil problem of religious profiling. Why is this happening?
It's been the norm. Whenever there's an election year, you'll see racial profiling and religious profiling. Political candidates will start using the race card to win votes. And a message to go today is what the people need and what the people want is nation-building message, not a message to divide people.
Zia, do you think it's to their benefit? Why are they doing this?
Well, it certainly does give you a very interesting angle that you're trying to combat race, but the effect that it has is it's just more of the same fear-mongering. You appeal to people's fears and sensibilities, and then you try to pull in votes, which is quite honestly shameful.
It is shameful. It should be stopped. And I'm glad that we are voicing this through this program called Speak Your Mind. Now, my other important question is, why is the Muslim and recently South Indian community in particular, mostly Muslims in particular, being vilified, held responsible for perceived wrong in the country?
Shami, it's a historical problem. It is a historical problem, and it goes back to indenture. See, this is the problem with politicians who want to use the race and the religious card, and they don't have any sense and appreciation of our history. So when Indians were first brought into Fiji to work on indenture, there was a lot of communalism. Communalism was the logic through which they were trying to organize governance and self-determination. And that legacy of whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or North Indian or South Indian, whether you're a Gujarati or non-Gujarati, those things were absolutely instrumental in the agitation for rights in the colonial era. So whether schools had, if it was a Hindu school, could you have a Muslim, head teacher? And I've got, heaps of documents from the colonial archives as I was working on my PhD on this issue, whether, you would have separate Muslim representation in parliament and so on and so forth. And sadly, some of the leaders are still exploiting this thing. They're exploiting the fact that the Honorable Attorney General and Minister for Justice happens to be somebody who's Muslim. And so, a generalized attack on religion.
Which is Muslim is a very minority community.
And the point is that, professing to a certain faith does not mean that we're all sort of sharing sort of common values and all of that. There's pluralism within these communities. There's pluralism amongst Muslims. There's pluralism amongst Hindus. Amongst Hindus, you have Arya Samajis, you have Sanatis, so on and so forth. There's pluralism, amongst Christians. They're Catholics, Methodists, so on and so forth. And people are exploiting on the one hand.
Yes. Ashwin, can I just move on to Bulutani? I'm sorry, we just want to cover both gentlemen, and then we'll continue.
So
Definitely.
like what Ashwin said, not only one religion is attacked, all religions are attacked. And likewise for ethnicity, not only the Muslim and South Indian are being vilified. It's all ethnic.
But if you look at the trend in Fiji, it's mostly been the Muslims.
because of in my view, it is what is happening all over the world that has
But how about
through the media.
looking at Fiji
Yeah.
concept? Yes.
Yes, what we have been observing is the rise in Islamophobia. Before I walked in, somebody messaged me about number of Muslim are coming into the country, and before election, certain number will be here, and what they're going to do. Which my concern and my worry: what will happen to my friend who is of Muslim faith, my colleague? That is a concern.
Yeah. So why has it become a concern now? Muslims have been coming in the country all this while. Why all of a sudden there is a big hue and cry that Muslims are coming and Muslims will take over? Yeah, what's your comment?
Well, to me personally, it does seem very funny, especially some of the things that you see, the baseless accusations that you see floating around on social media. And what's really bad is that all of this has just been exacerbated by people who should be working towards solving these issues and creating more of a tolerance. But politicians pick this up and they run with it as a campaigning tool or as something to pull voters of a certain religion towards themselves.
And some people get emotionally drained, and there are some so-called fools, we may say, who have personal agenda, who run with this race. Yes, Ashwin, you were trying to say something.
So the point is that if you look at, for instance, one of the politicians, who's made some incredible remarks about, funding coming in from some Muslim countries and so on and so forth. If we were to do our homework and exercise reason, the countries that this particular politician is alluding to are war-torn countries that are actually receiving funding from the global West. So how can these countries that are afflicted with war and poverty actually fund Fiji? And so, I think that's the kind of debate that needs to happen, which is not happening. And I certainly hope that people start to do more investigative journalism and ask these deep, kind of questions. For instance, Iraq, countries in Saudi Arabia are apparently funding, Fiji. Where are the documents? What is the history of these countries? Where is the connection? And why those connections? I mean, there's so many countries in this world, and we know that, where the funds are coming from in terms of the World Bank and so on and so forth. Why the allusion to these particular countries? These countries have a certain ethnicity, these countries have certain races, and so on and so forth. So we know what the politicians are doing. We know exactly what they're doing because people want to exploit our most primordial fears and differences because that's how... that's the gateway to parliament.
Yeah. So what you're trying to say is instigating fear, using racial profiling, now religious profiling.
Shami, we're not talking merit. For instance, they're saying so many Muslims on the board, so many Muslims here, so many Muslims there. The point is, can we talk merit?
Yes, absolutely. Can we talk merit? And if someone is speculating, ask questions. Why? Who? Where? And what is the motive behind it? Is it a bait of fear to instill fear in people and get more votes now that election is coming? Gentlemen, thank you for your input. We take another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what is the objective who drive this agenda and what can good people do to stop those who spread this hate, particularly on social media. Some food to think about, and please do visit my Facebook page, Speak Your Mind, and post your comments as we speak. Welcome back on Speak Your Mind. I have three gentlemen, my guests, very intelligent people, and today we have got together to discuss the topic race. I'm obsessed with race, Ashwin Raj, Bulutani, and Ziad. Now, what is the main objective of people who drive this agenda, that is racial profiling, ethnicity, religious profiling? And then we'll move to our next question. What can good people do to stop those who spread this hate, particularly on social media? At the moment, people haven't been doing much, as in good people. Ashwin?
Okay, so the motivation is very, very clear. These people want a house divided. They will, on the one hand, talk about equality and freedom from discrimination. On the other hand, say, look, we're equal, but we need to be separate. Or we're separate, but we're equal. Because keeping a house divided, keeping people divided, is the only way they can access power. And right now, it is about their insatiable appetite for power. They're desperate. They want to walk into the corridors of power through the institutions of parliament and elsewhere. So they will basically use our people, divide and rule like the colonial rulers did, just in their zeal to get power. These are people that have never stood up, for instance, and supported me when I've spoken out against racism. Instead, they've said resign, because they keep pushing the argument around freedom of expression. Why? Because the moment we start exercising responsibility, the moment we say we need to stop racism, we need to stop racial profiling, we need to stop identifying our differences and look at cohesion, their business will come to an end.
Definitely. Bulutani, it's so like you said, Ashwin, that the zeal, I think it's because of insecurity, right? And
It's greed.
it is greed, insecurity. So then you use different baits, which is very harmful, right? Yes.
The drive is very simple. That is just to create fear and to destabilize the peace, the effort that has been laid by our forefathers and those who have gone before us.
So, Ziad, what is the main objective of these people, the agenda to drive this?
Well, exactly as the two gentlemen have answered, it is, I mean, it's very clear that it's fear-mongering. And it seems that some political parties may not even be able to sustain themselves if they let go of these policies. Because
So
that's the main appeal to their voters.
Yeah, if you've noticed, one word or two words which keep coming is the political parties, So they are the main instigators. Now, Ziad, what can good people do to stop this, who spread hate, particularly on social media?
Well, as a user of social media and various forms of social media, I've seen that the people who engage in these racist discussions, it's very difficult to get through to them. So I think the best way, and this is something that is currently being done by a government, is introducing some form of regulation, especially on social media.
Bulutani?
One question is to ask ourselves is, have we done enough in terms of raising awareness? And we need champions, people to speak out. We need space. One is, we are here today, two gentlemen sitting with me talk about this. We have to talk about it openly. Last Saturday, we had this Equal at My concert. And I believe people who attended the event, and it should not be a one-day thing, and it should be ongoing. So people has to come together and talk about it openly and try to talk about an uncomfortable issue and topic of discussion, which is very important.
You mentioned that there hasn't been much awareness. What makes you say that?
No. The question I asked was, have
Has
we
there been much
done
awareness?
Yeah, have much awareness. But for CCF, we have been doing that. For me personally, I've been talking to friends. I will tell them we need, at this moment in time in Fiji, we need nation builders. We need people who can champion unity and togetherness in a multicultural society like Fiji.
Ashwin?
Well, Shami, since it is Speak Your Mind, let me speak my mind. In a country where human rights defenders have talked a lot about civil and political rights, they have historically and systematically stayed quiet on the issue of institutionalized racism, on the prevalence of hate speeches and communal antagonism. And so the point is that we need the so-called self-anointed human rights defenders to actually come out and say racism, it stops with you, it stops now. Question the stereotypes, question the generalizations about people's hair, people's way of eating, the way they speak, how they interact with each other, and then actually become voices of reason, become forces of cohesion. So the point is that, to what extent have human rights people actually gone quiet when we should be speaking out?
Ashwin, while you speak about this, would you may agree or disagree? I think human rights with you, Ashwin, and the team, you have raised much awareness. You've been very vocal, for which you have been targeted. Do you think that has CCF done anything on this, or there are any other organizations who are raising voice against this?
On the issue of racism,
yes.
I think CCF, we have been doing it since 1991, and that was the reason of CCF's existence to speak out against racism. And we have been reaching out to communities, to provincial government level and national level, and we are the secretariat of the CERD working group in Fiji, and we report to the CERD committee in Geneva about Fiji status in this, and we come back and continue to lobby to the government.
Let's take Ziad, an independent person's view on this. Be honest. What do you think? Have institutions or human rights, all these people, have they played their part in raising awareness and talking about this?
Well, certainly in certain spaces, yes, but I think more needs to be done to combat race on the grassroots level, so that because the people that are most affected by racism and racist policies are people on the ground level.
So what's
And
the
I think,
expectation? Who should do it when you talk about grass level? Who should reach out to them?
organizations, NGOs, especially media organizations, should play a more important role, a more active role in combating racism, and not just tiptoeing around the issue.
If you look at Fiji Broadcasting Corporation, we have through our radio stations and television, if you watch our TV and radio, there is a special message which talks about obsessed with racism.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think everyone should take it from there too, as in media.
Shami, the one thing I wanted to say was, again, another uncomfortable issue.
Yes.
The debate in Parliament around, data based on ethnicity, after the census and all of that.
Yes.
Now, this country hasn't had the kind of robust discussion that we should be having, particularly with people who insist that we need to have data based on race and ethnicity. I mean, the point is, they say, we need to understand non-communicable diseases, about health issues, blah, blah. We're in no position to generalize, because today, every Ethiopian eats roti, every Indo-Fijian eats dalo. What has our ethnicity got to do with our diabetes? What has our ethnicity got to do with our poverty?
Bulutani,
What
would you
has
like to
our
comment?
ethnicity got to do with our access to school?
Absolutely,
The
yes.
point is, we should be talking about human dignity for all.
Absolutely.
We shouldn't be talking about whether it's an Indo-Fijian who's got diabetes
Or,
or an
yes,
Ethiopian who's
based
not getting
on
into
census,
school.
right.
We move away from that kind of
Yes.
thinking. So I want to talk about the point. You see, racism keeps recurring its ugly head
Yes.
because we get obsessed with that kind of
Right.
data production.
Bulutani, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
census, people were asking for data based
Yeah,
on that.
like
Yes.
on ethnicity, that I will differ with Ashwin
Yes.
on that. I believe that we need those data, and it's very important in certain areas.
Why do you think it's important?
Because there are things that you need to relate to the ethnicity, to the background of the person. We are very unique, and we need to categorize.
Yeah.
But to address, because the issue is racism.
Yes.
So to address
But
racism,
now
we have to address
ethnicity is
So are
coming
we
into
saying
picture.
a
Are we
particular
doing
community is racist, a particular community is victim, and the other is perpetrator? Because where I sit, I see a lot of complicity.
Yeah, yes, Bulutani.
And going back to what I was saying is the issue of racism, we have to address it from a multicultural perspective,
Yes.
using multicultural approach in addressing racism. Yeah.
So, Zia, do you think we need ethnicity breakdown from census report? There has been much talk and debate in the parliament on this.
Well, I personally don't exactly see the need for it, but I will say that there are certain areas, thematic areas, where we do need to differentiate. But the truth of the matter is that we don't discuss those things because we're so busy bringing race into places where it's not needed.
It could be a healthy discussion around this
Shami,
data, but not to use it for your personal agenda.
Discrimination begins with distinction. The moment I say you're different because of this, that's how we begin discrimination. And from distinction to discrimination to debasement, where you completely rob off your sense of humanity by saying, oh, look at the number of people from this community who have access to land. Oh, look at the number of people who have got these many
Definitely.
jobs.
Yes,
Look
Ashwin
who's
will-
got access
yes.
to water, who doesn't,
Yes.
on the basis of
Thanks.
ethnicity.
We'll take a break. And very important point, what Ashwin said, and Bulutani and Ziad, please go and visit our Speak Your Mind Facebook page and post comments as we speak. We're taking a break, and then we will end our Speak Your Mind segment in our last break, which is in the next break. Welcome back on Speak Your Mind. And gentlemen, this is our last segment. My question is, what can happen if we don't do something to fight the evil? And what should be done to people who spread this hate?
Shami, we've seen the impact of racism. The point is, the state, under the Constitution, has a legal obligation to protect everybody in Fiji from racial vilification, racist hate speeches, religious vilification, and therefore we need to continuously encourage the state to uphold this particular constitutional right for everyone to be free from vilification on any of the prohibited grounds of discrimination. And if we don't put this to a check, I'm afraid we're going back to 1987. I'm afraid we're going back to 2000. And Fiji cannot afford to see that. And the point is, a vast majority of people in Fiji see that. They keep talking to me about the fact that, look, Ashwin, today we enjoy so many fundamental rights and freedoms that we didn't. We don't have to use our ethnicity or race as a qualifier to access various rights and institutions.
Thank you, Ashwin. Mr. Bulutani, what will happen if we don't do something about this to fight this evil, and what should be done to those people who spread this hate?
We have we have to learn from other countries what has happened in other countries, and that is that should be our learning point, and it should not happen. And it could be worse than it is. It could be, and that is the point we don't want to go.
Exactly.
It's too far. We have to move forward. Like that's why I've been keep repeating. We need nation builders.
Yes.
And I think we need comprehensive legislation in order to combat racial discrimination in Fiji. And for people to do this, again, more awareness and more awareness. And we need legislation in order for them to be prosecuted.
Zia?
Well, I completely agree with Mr. Bulutani here that sometimes the effects of racism are more subtle. They can't be obviously seen, but in other countries, such as Myanmar and places where it's becoming difficult for people of a certain race or a certain religion to live peacefully. And I'd hate to see Fiji become like that one day.
Yeah. So your closing remarks, gentlemen. Zia, would you like to continue from there? Very quickly.
Well, in concluding, I'd just like to say that yes, race is important, but only in certain discussions and certain places where it does become an important factor. But politicians, political parties in Fiji are so busy discussing race where it isn't needed that it allows them to, or it tends to take them away from the important discussions.
Right, thank you. Bulutani, very quickly.
We are a few days away from Easter, and the message of love to the listeners. And this is, we should live love, live L-I-V-E. We should live it, we should walk it, we should talk about it, and we should share it.
Yes.
We're all children of God, so why the distinction? Simple as that. Make racism history, and it begins with you.
Yes. So let us stop racism. It begins with me. It begins with Ziad, Bulutani, Ashwin. It begins with you. What are you going to do about this when you do hear such racial debates and comments on social media and by politicians who have their personal agenda? What are you going to do about it? Will you be part of this? Will you believe in the speculation, emotional, or are you going to stand up and say no, an end to it? Thank you for joining me on Speak Your Mind, gentlemen, and interesting. We'll continue again from here, and join me on Speak Your Mind next week. I hope you have enjoyed the show.
Say no
Thank
to
you very much.
racism.
Say no to racism. Thank you.